And here we are. Welcome back to the Redshirt Sophomore, where we never sit out. We're your hosts, MD and CD. Ding, 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 ding. What is that? That is the out the door bell for Jim Harbaugh. See ya. He's going to the Chargers. We're starting off the show with breaking news, CD. How does that make you feel?
As well. We were literally planned to go on and record it here. We got some Big Ten stuff to talk about, and what more fitting than talk about Big Ten's champion, national champion, Michigan, right? That big blue M, um, Jim Harbaugh to the NFL. That is great. I mean, we've kind of been hearing that for a while now. The past couple years, it's been kind of like, oh, is it the Vikings? Is it the Broncos? Now the Chargers and Falcons interested, and he finally signs on the dotted line there. It's exciting for both Harbaugh gets another shot at the NFL, trying to win a Super Bowl, which we know has been his goal since he was there, so close. And then the power outage happened against his brother John, back in the early 2010s with Colin Kaepernick there in San Fran. Now he's back on the West Coast where he's coached a lot, right? San Diego, University of San Diego, right? We talked about Stanford and obviously with San Francisco in the Bay Area there, and now he's back in LA. But yeah, this is not an NFL podcast, but this is still massive, massive news in the college ranks, right?
Yeah, and we'll get talking about that. Make sure if you're watching the video and you like the content, just like the video. Boom. That's a really easy rule we have there. Like the content, like the video, right? Make sure you guys are also consider subscribing as well if you want to hear more stuff as we continue to unpack what is this crazy off season. If you're listening on Spotify, give us a follow, give us a 5-star rating. Make sure you're also following us on Twitter at the Redshirt Soft. Email us with any questions you have at the Redshirt Sophomore at gmail.com. That can be questions, that can be ideas, that can be hey, you guys are doing a really good job. And those are the kind of emails that we love. Those are the kind of emails that we love. But let's talk about Jim Harbaugh for a second. There was a period of time when you and I think, both agreed that it wasn't going to work out for Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was
A-
there was
After
a there was a blip.
there was a massive hump at Ohio State that he just tried and tried and tried to get over. And in other big time games, ranked opponents, Michigan State. Remember that his record against Michigan State and Ohio State for his first couple years there was just awful, 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 awful. And then the 2021 season gets around, right? And he loses to Michigan State, if I believe that's right, with Kenneth Walker there.
Yep.
And everyone's like, well, here we go again with Jim Harbaugh. And then he finally gets over the Ohio State hump. Aiden Hutchinson and the boys there take him to the Big Ten championship. And then obviously got demolished down in Miami against Georgia. But then obviously since then, it's kind of just been rinse and repeat in the Big Ten.
Yeah. Yeah. Rinsing. Talk about rinsing. He is rinsing, folks. But no longer will he be doing that. So, and what was interesting is I found the timing very interesting because the timing happens to align with, all the speculations off the field, and a lot of his central talent pool happens to be out the door next year. He just won a national championship. Like, that was his goal. Like, it feels like this is really interesting time. And we've been speculating this for years now that Jim Harbaugh was going to go to the NFL, and it's finally happened. Like, do you think this all has something to do with it, or do you think he just was ready to go to the NFL again?
Well, I think like correlation is not always causation. Like you see a bunch of things, and it seems like the stars, like you mentioned, just kind of aligned for him to exit here. You mentioned the national championship, you mentioned his core guys, including his quarterback and beloved player JJ McCarthy, a ton of talent walking out the door, which they do have a ton returning, and we'll get into that with 2024 and beyond, what we think about Michigan's program and all that. But obviously, you talk about 2 straight years of flirting with the NFL, and obviously, which he was obviously serious with, taking the famous interview on signing day was crazy, right? It was National Signing Day in February,
Yeah.
and he was interviewing and so for an
What,
NFL
the
job.
Vikings? Or no.
Yeah,
That was, I think he was interviewing the Vikings in January. I
it might
forget
have been
when.
the Broncos. Whoever it was
I don't know.
hilarious and like crazy that he still continued to like keep a fantastic culture, recruit pretty well, not elite, but I think that was part of it. Like if you're a guy in a 23 or 22 kind of guy that's like he, for 2 straight years, it's easy that it is to negatively recruit that. And it's like, well, it's a good problem to have if you're Jim Harbaugh. Obviously a lot of success at Michigan leads to opportunities in the NFL. But yeah, you mentioned all those things align for him. It sounds like this is the perfect opportunity in the NFL for him. You got a guy like Justin Herbert, who obviously we know as college fans pretty well down up over in Eugene, Oregon. Was a 3-year starter for them there. Very, very good. Obviously, talented player, super strong arm, mobility, IQ, all the things you love in a franchise quarterback in the NFL. Hasn't got quite the coaching and success in the win-loss column, but he's put up crazy numbers, and it's obviously it's been a lot of other problems there in Los Angeles for him. It's not quite all his fault. I think Jim Harbaugh sees that, and he sees you got a star left tackle, Rashawn Slater, Northwestern guy. You've got obviously the Bosa on the end there from Ohio State and guys like Mike Evans or Mike Williams, Quentin Johnston, who's getting better, maybe. A lot of things you like on that team. And then also there is a vacuum there of I don't want to call it personnel, but it's also like decision making, right? Like they don't have a GM right now. I think part of what he wanted in the NFL was a pretty stable organization, like in terms of player wise. Like you don't have to overhaul the roster. Right? It's a pretty talented roster, and you can also have some decision making power, like you do in college, where you're picking your team, you're recruiting guys, you have a ton of full control over just about everything in the program. And Jim Harbaugh kind of wants to do that Bill Belichick thing where he wants to go in and have a ton of say in who he can draft, who he can recruit, a free agency, and all that good stuff. And I think it's just the stars aligned for him, and this was the right time for him and his family to move on to the NFL. And it sucks for Michigan because it was such a great season, a magical season. Everyone was against the Michigan against the world. Obviously, that we called them a team of destiny on this podcast because of that and everything that happened. They ended up winning it, and we sprinkled some money back in the summer, which we love, we love, we love. And obviously, exciting times for Michigan, but at the same time, this is just a massive deal, especially with the transfer portal rule, which we'll get into. I'm kind of rambling here, but there's just so much to talk about it. Even though we know it's been coming for a couple days, couple weeks, couple years now, we've kind of been gearing up for this leave departure of Harbaugh back to the NFL. But I don't know. There's so much going on. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're a Big Ten expert, so I'm gonna let you ramble, and I'm gonna ask you more questions. All right, one, it feels like the hire is going to be Sharon Moore. We don't know that for sure. For all I know, when the video's out, like it could be for certain. But that's that's what everything kind of points to right now. I know there was some smoke a couple weeks ago about Brian Kelly, Lance Leipold's been a name, Matt Campbell. I would like you to walk us through how you would feel about Sharon Moore and what your favorite hire would be if it wasn't going to be Sharon Moore.
Okay, yeah, great questions there. Obviously, yeah, the Sharon Moore, it's kind of he almost had his like interview, this season with all that happened with Harbaugh. 6 games, I believe, is the numbers of he fell in. That's half a year, half a regular season for Sharon Moore to get eyes for the players to trust him to run the organization and especially on game day in some big time games. You mentioned Penn State and Ohio State were 2 games that he played in or he coached in, as the interim head coach there. So yeah, I think Sharon Moore would be a great fit. And it makes sense, a lot of sense in the building. You know him in a day where roster retention is so difficult. We saw what happened at Alabama. Now, maybe was it a little bit overstated? Was timing pretty bad for a couple of those players? Yes, but obviously Washington, you see Arizona even to a lesser extent, but you see it's tough to maintain your roster when everyone has open season on your team. 30 days, all those guys can leave, and you can't really go out and get anybody immediately to fill those holes. You have to wait till spring portal, so it causes a lot of anxiety and tension in the fan bases for sure. But I do think, to answer your question there with Sharon Moore, yeah, I like it a lot. In terms of other candidates, I mean, you think Brian Kelly has been floated out a lot there. I don't think he would leave LSU for Michigan. Don't know that for sure, but
I'm on
that's
that
obviously
boat
very.
too, but there is a lot of smoke for
It's
some reason. Like it wouldn't there has to be some truth to that, Not that Brian
or from
Kelly
someone's corner. Like there's
from
someone playing an
someone's
angle
corner.
right now, whether it's Michigan or whether it's Sharon Moore trying, or whether it's I guess
Brian
I
Kelly
don't know.
trying to get a little more
Right.
money on
Yeah,
his end.
exactly. So who knows there? I've heard Lance Leipold, obviously a guy that coached in
I
the
would
Midwest.
love that one, by the way.
Yeah.
I would love
Yeah.
that one.
Lance Leipold is an elite developer of talent. Obviously, Michigan has not recruited at an elite level. So a guy that can come in there and win with improve the overall floor of it, the roster. pretty impressively, like he did at
By
Kansas,
elite
Buffalo,
level,
and
you mean a top five level, right?
yes, yes, for a team that has consistently been in the
Okay.
national championship picture and the college football playoffs, top four, right? They are not recruiting to the same likes as in recruiting rankings wise. Now they've done a good job of identifying guys that were high 3 stars, low 4 stars, and
And they
developing them.
develop. They
Yeah,
develop. At
but
that school, they develop.
which credit to Harbaugh and staff there, Sharon Moore included. But also, there's a lot of rumors about, Harbaugh taking a lot of staff there. Jesse Minter's a name that has been thrown out a ton to fall under the NFL. Obviously, is a Jay Harbaugh, his son. Obviously a guy that I don't know if Michigan fans are gonna miss too much, but he's a guy that's obviously gonna head out and change the continuity of that staff. Get back to candidates. You Brian Kelly, Lance Leipold, Matt Campbell is a guy that's been thrown around. Some of the regular names that you've heard all throughout the coaching cycle make a ton of sense here. Obviously, real quick, I want to ask you, how good is Michigan's job? Right? Is this an elite job? We've seen Texas A&M open, we've seen Bama open this cycle. Where do you rank them in terms of the Big Ten, but also in college football, the landscape of that in general?
Jobs that I would rather have than the Michigan head coaching job. Georgia,
Yep.
Alabama,
Yep.
Texas,
Yep.
Texas A&M,
Well, okay.
Ohio State. This isn't in any particular order, by the way. Ohio State,
Yep.
LSU, okay,
Oh.
and I'd have to think about finding another one, but I think that's I'll
What
definitely
Oregon?
take those six. Maybe
Oregon?
you like the Nike, you like Phil Knight there.
Especially
I would
in
I would consider
2024
Oregon.
and beyond, Oregon has
Yeah,
improved their value than it used to be, especially with college football becoming a national recruiting landscape, right? Like Oregon can go out of the West Coast and find a lot of those
yeah,
offensive
yeah.
linemen, defensive linemen that they
Oh,
want.
Florida.
Yeah, Florida is underratedly it hasn't seen the success it's had since the late 2000s, but yeah, that is an elite
I wouldn't take the Florida
program as
State
well.
job based on the situation that school is in right now.
Just the ACC. Exactly. So the Big Ten, SEC, that stuff matters. Being at a tier one job in those conferences make a massive difference in terms of longevity in the future of college football, but also the payday as well.
Yeah. And
But
job and program are different, right? Job and program are different. Like Michigan is a better program than Texas
Texas
A&M
A&M,
is, Florida is, Texas is right now,
Oregon. I mean, they're on the top of college
Oregon.
board.
They won
Them,
the national
Georgia,
championship.
Bama. Them, Georgia,
They're
Bama
a
are top three in any order you want. Probably Georgia, Michigan, Bama.
yes,
And
but
then, yeah.
the Michigan head coaching job, unless you are an elite national recruiter, right? It's a harder job than Ohio State, I think. It's a harder job.
Oh, yes. Well, in the thing, Ohio State does has expectations, but you also look at what he's doing right now at Ryan Day, in the portal, which we'll get to obviously in our Big Ten breakdown and recap of the year. But the first thing I did when I saw this, right, and I was like, okay, Jim Harbaugh, what am I going to talk about? Well, first of all, like the 30-day window, I think cannot be overstated. Even if Sherrone Moore is hired up, right, which is a massive deal, and that helps with roster continuity, right? Kalen DeBoer went to Alabama, a guy that did not recruit or talk with or interact with any of these recruits and players and families, right? Nobody knew who he was outside of the past maybe month or so in terms of on a national level. And he has to go in there and convince them to stay and to, yes, they committed to Nick Saban in Alabama, but they want him to commit to him in about, an hour or so team meeting. The first thing I did was pull up Michigan's depth chart, right? Guys that Michigan and Sherrone Moore has to keep for the next year. They got big time news in Junior Colson returning, right, which was massive for them. And obviously Ernest Hausman will still be there at linebacker, but you lose Michael Barrett, I believe, and you lose Jalen Harrell, I believe, as also. Um, but yeah, so Junior Colson's a guy that obviously seems committed to Michigan, but who knows? Rod Moore, I believe, is coming back. If I'm not mistaken, he's their stud safety in the second, staying in the secondary. Obviously, Will Johnson, a lot has been made of him. A guy that started for 2 straight years for you since he's been a true freshman. He's a guy that a lot of people will be excited about. Going to the D line, Mason Graham is a just monster up the middle. Him and Kenny Grant are two true sophomores that really feasted and made that front seven what it was. And then obviously on the offense side of the ball, you lose a ton of offensive linemen anyways to graduation in the NFL draft. But Colson Loveland as your tight end there, he's a guy, freaky athlete, a guy they really got involved and made some big time plays in the passing games, in their big games, especially in the conference there. So yeah, those are some names I really circle. Obviously, you've got some teams with some holes to fill, and obviously those guys who have won a national title, played in a ton of big time games, coached and developed by very good coaches. You'd love to add them to your roster. So that to me, that's step one. If you're Sharon Moore, you're quietly putting together a staff. At the same time, you also have to make those guys a priority on keeping them because as you see, in some programs, you just keep a couple keystone players at the top there, and then they can do the work to really convince everybody else to stay and buy in to the future of Michigan football.
Yeah, I think locking down Sharon Moore is a big deal. We saw it happen to Alabama. Like you mentioned it. Like it makes it a lot easier for that continuity. And the players believe in Sharon Moore. I mean, he won big ball games there for them. Basically won a Big Ten championship as their head coach. Basically did that.
Yeah, and especially in the regular season. And yeah, Jim Harbaugh coached against Iowa, but they had no chance to win that game anyways. And also think about this here. I believe you were the one that talked about it before we went on air tonight was Michigan, University of Michigan, and the state of Michigan, because there's a public institution in the state of Michigan, that job has to be open for quote unquote 7 days, right? Whatever that means. I'm sure they can get waivers and whatnot, but you mentioned they have to act quickly, right? And the thing is here is if they're going to open up to a quote unquote national hire and to open up the job to anyone that can, they can recruit and interview guys, they have to be confident, and that's the direction they're going to go in because you have to work quickly. You have to give these players a ton of confidence in who they are coming in and get. You have to control the narrative. If you're the AD of Michigan and you're the president of Michigan, you have to control the narrative because they can spin it and players can easily lose trust and they can just hop on the portal and they would have, you know, money bags being thrown at them left and right. And obviously you don't want that, even that opportunity to happen there.
Yeah, absolutely earth-shattering news in the Big Ten. Ohio State fans are celebrating. Yeah, this is crazy. This is crazy. So we will continue to follow this story as it develops with, potentially Sherrone Moore. If they for some reason decide to go in a different direction, which, I'm not opposed to either. This will be really, really interesting to follow. So thank you guys for allowing us to, yeah, well, you got something else?
Yeah, real quick, I do want to say, and I want to get your thoughts on this in terms of like what goes into making this higher in terms of like valuing short-term goals and short-term roster, keeping that together, but also long-term. Like, let's say you believe in Sherrone Moore and you think he's a B plus guy, right? And you're like, hey, we like him a lot. I don't know if we love him, but we also love the fact that he will keep that roster together in the short term, but we don't know if he's going to be a guy that can continue to compete on a national championship type level. Whereas if you had options like an A hire like Brian Kelly or maybe Lance Leipold or some guy you feel is a slam dunk home run guy for the University of Michigan, if you're the AD, how do you balance the two?
Here's here's my thoughts. If I was the AD, I hire Sherrone Moore, and I'll tell you why. There's you hear about a lot of different examples of, interim head coaches like coming in and getting the head coaching job. In those situations, it isn't always the right thing to do, right? That's the thing that the players want, sure, okay, but sometimes the culture that's built into that program, right, isn't always, the best one. Like if say if a coach got fired, right, or if extraneous circumstances where the coach is relieved of his duties, right? In this scenario, this team has had a consistent culture of development, work ethic. This culture is already there. The winning national championship culture is already there. So my thought is, why would you you should do everything in your power to try to keep that there while you have it. And that means, yeah, sure, like guys like Jesse Minter will go to the, with Jim Harbaugh and some other folks on staff, but if Sherrone Moore stays, you know, your strength and conditioning team still stays, right? Your some of your analysts are still there. Your equipment team is still in there. Like you still you get your training staff, like everything is still in place that you need to win, right? It's just can Sharon Moore, can you put together some other pieces of his staff that can recruit at even a higher level when while the Big Ten is becoming more competitive. That's the question. So I think he could do that. We'll see. But that's what I would do. And that's what I value in this particular situation. That's why I think it's such an interesting situation because this team won a national championship and their coach is leaving. I don't know.
Yeah.
When was the last time we saw that?
It's 1998, I believe. Was I saw a stat? I believe it was the 90s with Nebraska, if I'm not mistaken, or was it not Florida State? Whatever it was, it was. And first of all, a totally different era with the transfer portal, right? Back then, the coach leaves unless you're an NFL draft guy. Like you don't
The
that new
culture's
coach
still there.
doesn't have to worry about exactly that. Those new players doesn't have to worry about it. I look back to Ohio State and Oklahoma, right? Bob Stoops and Urban Meyer leaving those respective programs, and obviously Ryan Day took over for Urban Meyer, and Lincoln Riley took over for Oklahoma and Bob Stoops, and I think those kind of guys was where like they were almost handpicked, and I wonder if Jim Harbaugh had to say, or it was like, hey, Stromore, don't take the Purdue job last year. Like, stay here. I'm going to be out the door in a couple of years here at least, and the job will be yours. And I want you. And there was a succession plan, which we thought Nick Saban had in Steve Sarkisian. That obviously Texas came calling, and that went out the door, and they had to pivot. And obviously they did a nice job pivoting to Kalen DeBoer. But yeah, here it sounds like that's a similar thing there. And those two programs, I think, had success. Now, obviously, the national championships have not been there, those programs, but also like Ryan Day has won more than just about anybody else since taking over, right? And Lincoln Riley did they're very good jobs winning Heisman trophies, getting to the college football playoffs, and obviously moving on to USC. But yeah, I do think that that's a really interesting point you make there.
Absolutely. Shall we move on?
Let's do it.
All right. Up next, we got Big Ten season recap, right? What is that going to include? Our Big Ten season recap is going to include just kind of a breakdown of the standings. Was it what we expected? Some takes, some makes, some misses that we had back in the summer. If you were a listener all the way from back in the summer, you remember some of them. And boy, were we right about some of them. And boy, we were wrong about some of them. But that's just what always happens. And I just love looking back at stuff like that and seeing like how we did, what was our feel, what was our vibe. Definitely going to be talking about awards as well because we gave our predictions for awards and of course our over under takes as well. What do we take? What do we not take? What were we scared to take? Maybe some regrets. Maybe some regrets. So I guess how do we want to start this? Let's talk about now that we're on the coaches. I guess let's just talk about coaches that got fired.
Okay.
Let's talk about coaches that got fired and that are going to get replaced this next year. Mel Tucker out the door. Pat Fitzgerald out the door. Tom Allen out the door. Tom Allen was the only one that was fired at the end of the season for actual performance, whereas the other two were fired for different reasons. And we just talked about Jim Harbaugh, so we don't need to get into that as much. But I don't know. I think all those we've talked about all those hires. Those are pretty good hires. Did you think that it was the right time to fire Tom Allen in that situation? Do you think uh, that Michigan State is better off without Mel Tucker? And let's erase the whole scandal, right, from
Yeah.
Pat Fitzgerald and Mel Tucker. Let's erase those. Do we think those programs are actually in better spots now, despite facing some adversity, than they were just 6 months ago?
Here's the deal. I do think that we'll start with Northwestern and Pat Fitzgerald. Obviously the interim job went to David Braun, I believe, and he ended up having a ton of success, outperforming our preseason expectations and everybody's preseason expectations. Made a bowl game, actually won one against a pretty good Utah team. And obviously he kept the title of head coach, was promoted to just full-time acting head coach. Congrats to him and his family and the Northwestern program. I don't know about better off than Pat Fitzgerald. I do think obviously everything off the field aside, right? We're talking about strictly on the field performance the next couple of years. Pat Fitzgerald did things at Northwestern that you just don't do at Northwestern. Like there's a reason why Vanderbilt just is continuously stinks in the SEC and in Northwestern. Pat Fitzgerald had that program, first of all, having multiple first round draft picks, elite NFL talent heading off the door, did a great job of scouting, evaluating, and keeping these guys, developing them into players that they were, and also like doing it the right way where, hey, president, hey, AD, my boss is at Northwestern. Give me time. Okay. Like every year, we're not going to make a bowl game. Every year, we're not going to compete in a bad Big Ten West. But he did it the right way where he built up to certain seasons and went all in and cashed in those seasons. And they made it to the Big Ten championships. They went to high bowl games and had a lot of success in those seasons. And he capitalized it and he made a payday. And obviously, David Braun looks to continue to do that in a similar way. But obviously, it's a totally different landscape, right? With the new Big Ten and all that goes on there. And they just keep moving down the rungs of the ladder in the Big Ten, which is tougher now than it has ever been for David Braun and Northwestern. We'll see. I mean, I had zero expectations for them this year. We were completely wrong about them.
None.
We had zero with no talent. We thought they had no talent on either side of the ball, and we're really going to struggle, especially with the coaching change and all that happened there, and their schedule and whatnot, and they completely played. They were second in the Big Ten West, right? They won 8 games. They won 8 games. That was incredible. Well, they won more games than Wisconsin. Obviously outperformed everyone else in the Big Ten West, and they did their thing. So yeah, I don't know. With Northwestern, I I don't know if it's gonna get much better than this, right? But it also could. Like every time I doubt Northwestern, I feel like they they play pretty damn well. So that's what I'll leave it at.
Yeah, I'll tell you on the show, I was very explicit about this team. It would be a miracle to make a bowl game. I said, quote, they're not that good. I was worried about them losing a lot of talent from last year. I mean, they lost 5 guys to the NFL last year, and they won 1 game with that team. One game with a team of 5 NFL players. Absurd, right? Absurd. So I just kept looking at it, and I'm like, okay, now you have this Pat Fitzgerald thing. So now their leader, right? Who players are transferring, players are upset. Oh my gosh, now the baseball coach is fired. Is this athletic department just an absolute mess? Yeah, it was until David Braun righted the ship. So he absolutely slam dunked on both of us. I know the under wasn't a play for you, but it was for me. And the under was 3. It was 3 wins. Northwestern had 8 wins. They had 5 wins in conference. In conference, they had 5 wins. That is absurd. That is absurd. So congrats Northwestern for making me look like an idiot. But I don't think did anyone expect this? Come on, let's be real here.
No, I
You're
don't know
if
if
you're a
David Braun
Northwestern
did.
fan in the comments, I want you to give me a reason why you believe the Northwestern from the beginning. Why did you believe in Northwestern? Why did you have this faith that they were going to make a bowl game? Because I would love to hear it because I just could not see it until it happened. And Ben Bryant, here's what I'll say. We might talk some, NFL draft stuff in the next couple months here. We'll figure out how we want to organize that content. But I've said this, and this might be the hottest take that I've ever had with like NFL draft stuff. But Ben Bryant won't get drafted, and that's fine. But some team should give him a shot to be a backup quarterback. That dude wins like wherever he goes. Cincinnati, Eastern Michigan, Cincinnati again, Northwestern. It does not matter what kind of talent surrounds him. He found ways to win ball games. Game manager style, right? Game manager
The
style.
he brings some legit value, not in terms of like franchise upside, but also like as a backup, like you mentioned, like a guy that has high
Just a
IQ,
backup.
a good enough arm, very accurate throw of the football, and then also has been in a ton of systems and knows everything there is to know about the quarterback position in college football. Obviously, he still has stuff to learn for sure. Every quarterback does, but also like there's some value there. I don't hate that take at all. I do think you see guys like Brock Purdy, you see guys, Chase
No, he's
Daniel.
not. Let's get that clear. He is not as good of a prospect as Brock Purdy was. And Brock Purdy was the last overall pick in the NFL draft. Ben Bryant will not be drafted in this upcoming NFL draft unless they pull a Sean Clifford like the Packers did last year, which was crazy. That was awesome. But
Okay,
like
I get,
just
yeah.
I mean, come on. He should be given a chance at a roster spot, is all I'm saying, on an NFL team.
Yeah, a better comp is probably another Northwestern Wildcat in Trevor Simeon, right? And obviously he's been in the NFL for a while, journeyman type of guy. So
Yeah.
yeah, credit to Northwestern. They outperformed our expectations, everyone's expectations. Yeah, and that was awesome to see. There's obviously magical stuff happens there in Evanston. It's hard to play and to win. Sometimes weird. Ryan Field is just still terrible, but they got some wins there this year, and they did their thing. Yeah, do you want to move on to one of the other coaches?
Yeah, let's talk Mel Tucker, Michigan State. Uh, 4-8. The over under that we took at the beginning of the year, I believe, was 5.5. I believe we took it at 5.5. It ended up going down to 4.5. I slammed it at 5.5. Slammed the under. Maybe we had someone in the comments. I don't have their name pulled up because I don't care at all. They said, please take the under. I want this person to be humbled. Awesome. Well, let me tell you, I triple united Michigan State under 5.5 and it cashed pretty easily. Now, was that partly thanks to Mel Tucker? Yeah, I think so. But I think this team also had its problems. We talked about it in the spring game. In the spring game, they didn't have a quarterback. And let's be real, Michigan State fans. Caden Hauser is not the answer. He was not the answer for the future either. It was not Noah Kim. It's not Caden Hauser, right? Now it's Aiden Childs, which is what you get. So I want to say that this program is in a better spot right now than it was back in July. Because I think Jonathan Smith is a better coach. I've been saying that. I've been saying that. I don't hate Mel Tucker as a coordinator, but Jonathan Smith is a better head coach. Aiden Childs is a better quarterback than Mel Tucker's had since actually Michigan State has had probably since Connor Cook, right?
Yeah,
It's been a few years. I mean, Connor Cook they took the team to the playoffs, right? I mean,
hey, he's an NFL quarterback. Yeah,
yeah,
Connor Cook's a
got
very good player.
spanked, got spanked by Bama in the playoffs, but he's pretty good. Yeah, I think things are looking up for Michigan State for sure. So sorry for the preseason hate this year and last year. If you ever had a conversation with me, I was not high on Michigan State either. After their explosive season, their over under win total was at 7.5. So whoa,
Thanks,
whoa.
sir.
And while everyone's slamming the over and moving this thing up, I'm like, let me zig that zag. So yeah, what are your thoughts, I guess, on this Michigan State team moving forward? And like any thoughts in particular on this team this year? And like, did they eh, play to your expectations? Did they not meet your expectations? Like, what happened here?
Yeah, it was kind of a tough year all around. They won a couple close games. They lost some games they probably shouldn't have lost. They definitely should have beaten Iowa. And yeah, that was kind of about it. I think they blew the Rutgers game, I believe, as well. So yeah, it was kind of wild up and down season. Obviously, a lot went on and off the field. They're looking for a fresh change there. I know they're glad to see a guy like Jonathan Smith, who we spoke very highly of in our video. If you want to check that out in our coaching carousel playlist of Michigan State's hire of Jonathan Smith. Interim head coach Harlan Barnett did, he did what he could. Obviously, it was not enough to keep the job there, and obviously, no one really expected him to do that because it was a tough situation he was in. Yeah, like you, for all the reasons you said, there was a ton of skepticism on his team, and to me, what's kind of been a glaring weakness for them for multiple years now under Mel Tucker is their O line, and they've continued to do not really much about it, and that's kind of been the story of their offense, where even if they had a quarterback back there, like I don't even know what he could really do, and obviously Kenneth Walker kind of patched a lot of those holes on that offense, like we saw. Defense, even though that was Mel Tucker's calling card, has also been pretty bad, especially that secondaries, which he his calling card in the NFL and obviously um in the SEC as well. So like it's kind of been weird. Um Past couple years there for Michigan State. I think they're ready to move on from the Mel Tucker era as the highs as high as the highs were, the lows were pretty darn bad, and obviously off the field stuff was just not good at all. We won't get into that on this show here, but yeah, Jonathan Smith, I'm sure they have to be excited about him. What we saw him turn around a pretty bad program in Oregon State at the time he took over, and obviously looks to do that in this new look Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, you had it at a push you said you weren't going to take the over or the under there. You didn't even lean the direction either. I think in hindsight, that's probably the right thing because, who could have expected the turmoil that was going to happen, right? I mean, just there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of question marks, I think, and also their schedule was pretty tough. I think you noted that as well in the preseason, and it proved to be pretty tough for them. So finishing, I mean, 2-7 in the conference, second to last, only in front of Indiana.
who
Jeez.
also fired their coach.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about
Hey,
Indiana.
so Tom Allen leaves. Obviously, Kirk Cignati comes up from.
Leaves
I'm
or he
sorry,
gets
he was
relieved
walked
of
out the
his
door.
duties.
Yeah,
But for $20 million, you can walk me out any door you want.
Tom Allen's doing fine. I believe he's going over to Penn State now, right, to be the defense coordinator there to replace Manny Diaz. He'll be there for a couple of years and obviously enter his name back in the head coaching search if he does so decide to choose. But yeah, Kirsten is a guy we both really like from James Madison. They had some really nice bright spots on their roster, and he kept a couple of his guys offensively. Obviously, couldn't keep Brennan Sorsby, who's going to Cincinnati, which is a really nice get there for Scott Satterfield and in the Big 12. But yeah, it's going to be a very interesting year there in Indiana. They've kind of really committed to a football program. It sounds like this offseason they're kind of done being the bottom of the Big Ten in football, and they know how important football is to their conference and to their standing in it. And so they're going all in. And obviously, yeah, this season they brought in a ton of transfers. Tom Allen swung for the fences and missed pretty heavily. But it was a desperate attempt for him. Like he was kind of backed into a corner. We talked about him in Indiana kind of being in wounded animal mode all throughout the offseason. And they obviously took some hits on some transfers, and none of them really hit that desperately. And yeah, we were kind of spot on. 3.5 was their total, and they were at 3 wins. And so that's kind of what they expected to do. And because of that, Tom Allen was left out the door.
Yeah, I will say. So if you're a lot of national couch fans, whatever. If you look at the Indiana program, you're like at the beginning of the season, you're like, oh, Tom Allen is for sure on the hot seat. And yeah, he was, and I think he knew it, right? But the reality is, it was a big deal for this Indiana program to buy him out like that, and that is the new Big Ten media rights deal money that was able to perform that. Because otherwise, Indiana, that athletic department would in no circumstance otherwise would be able to buy out Tom Allen. They'd be stuck with him for another couple of years. But it is important that they did that because I do think it means that, hey, we are the athletic department. We are the big men in the chairs. We do care about this football program, no matter how unsuccessful it has been in the last 30 years. Let's do something about it. So they did do something about it. We'll see if Kurt Cignetti's transfers work. I mean, they didn't seem to work for Tom Allen. And look, they probably won't work year one. Oh well. Doesn't mean it isn't a good hire. So overall, I'd say Indiana, yeah, like you said, met expectations. We both had a no play. We were skeptical on the transfers, but there were so many of them. We were like, not for me. I'm not gonna take that. Right. So yeah, definitely a last resort effort from Tom Allen. Didn't work out. But again, program might be headed in the right direction. Still a lot of time to be held, or a lot of time needs to pass before we can really decipher that. Curtis Rourke, though, is headed there to play quarterback. I like him a lot. We'll see how he does in the Big Ten, though. We will see how he does in the Big Ten. So that's for coaches that got fired. That's for coaches that got fired. You were bringing this up pre-show. I guess I'll let you ask the question about other coaches, that didn't get fired.
Yeah. So what's interesting is with it, we talked about like offseason and expectations and if you met them or not. There were some coaches that I thought seat were a little bit warm, or at least people that didn't get the monkey or get their ADs and their fan bases off their back, or guys that really took a step forward in 2023 to kind of give them, that cushion and like, hey, your job's secure for now. You did a great job. Let's extend you and get this ball rolling and continue the momentum, right? We talked about guys like for whatever reason, Ryan Day was on the hot seat, and some people right after the Michigan game were very upset with him, and rightfully so, right? Like you're a very
Calling
passionate
for
fan
his
base.
job.
That's ridiculous. That is unfair. Programs like Ohio State do not deserve to have a guy like Ryan Day. Okay, if you're very frustrated with
No.
him, you can fire him, and see where he lands immediately.
Yeah,
See how
yeah,
many people are
exactly.
knocking on his door because he's an incredible head coach. And you see, but I do think, right? Not was his seat ever hot this year by the administration, but there was some. Hey, Ryan Day, right? Michigan just won national title. Okay, you gotta maybe let's press the envelope here or whatever that saying goes. And we've seen it in the portal and with their NIL game, keeping people from the NFL draft, going all in for the season, bringing in a guy like Bill O'Brien to take over play calling duties. Yeah, I mean that obviously Ryan Day is not on the hot seat, nor what should he ever have been. But I do think like some buttons were pushed, and I think it's going to turn out well for him in the program in 2024 and beyond.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about then. Now that we're on the Ohio State train, we'll get back to other coaches that might have been on the hot seat. So their preseason over under win total was 10.5. That's a lot. Just in a team to win 11 games to hit their over. I said, no thanks. I said I'm not gonna take that. I'll leave it at 10.5. I'm not gonna touch it at all. Solely because like I was a Colin McCord believer. I stated that on the preseason show, right? I knew he could potentially put up numbers. I like the weapons that were around him. But the reality is, I didn't know what I was getting from the quarterback position. And I did believe that Penn State and Michigan were really, really good this year, which, both things can be true, right? So I was right to be high on the defense this year. It was unbelievable. I was right to not believe that Zach Harrison was missing him was a big deal at all. It literally was not. Addition by subtraction, we kind of nailed that. And also Notre Dame was on their schedule, so that kind of pushed me away as well. So, what were some things that you were looking at Ohio State at the beginning of the season that maybe came to fruition or didn't come to fruition?
Yeah, like you, I pushed, right. We were both worried about that O line, and it turned out to
Yeah,
be
Josh Fryer.
true.
That was a great take, by the way. I think I mentioned my question marks I had with Josh Fryer after watching the spring game, and yeah,
Their
there are
their
certainly
tackles,
question marks.
they struggled. Obviously, they tried to bring in a transfer. It didn't really work out fantastically. They had to replace CJ Stroud, which I don't think we realized how valuable he was, right? Obviously, the O line was really, really good. Obviously, the players around him were really, really good. But we see him lighting up in the NFL, winning a playoff game, doing all the good things that rookie quarterbacks aren't supposed to be doing in the NFL. And obviously, if you add CJ Stroud to a team like that, they're probably national title winners, if not very close to it. Yeah, and to me, the schedule scared me away. I didn't know exactly what Notre Dame was going to be, but I thought they'd be improved. And obviously, at home, Notre Dame was hosting Ohio State, so that definitely scared me. And then obviously Ohio State, I believe, had to go on the road to Michigan, and that obviously, it scared me as well. I was worried about Kyle McCord as well, a little bit more worried than you were. I was pushing for Devin Brown to take over that job, or more so hoping Devin Brown takes that job by the handles. But we were both behind the defense, which turned out to be right, and that was part of the reason which got Ohio State fans so excited about this team and about this potential because the problem that's been there for Ryan Day for a couple of years now is that defense has kind of been lagging in big time moments. Physicality has been a problem, but we saw that defense this year was nasty, 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 nasty. And obviously, they're bringing a lot of those guys back for 2024. Should be a very, very fun year for Ohio State. I know a lot of fans looking forward to that. We'll see what Will Howard does. How much better is he than Kyle McCord? I don't know.
I
I
like him.
like to think so. I do too. I think he adds an element in the running game,
Ah,
which is
and
underrated. He's a
it's
big
just
dude.
better. I'm sorry. And like, there are a lot of people out there that do not feel that way at all. That they really missed out on the Cam Ward sweepstakes. And Cam Ward, yeah, he's a stud. He probably could have been a better option than Will Howard, but man,
If you're good enough for Lincoln Riley, you're good enough for me. Okay, that's kind of what I
yeah.
feel about by
I mean,
quarterbacks. And Will Howard was committed there for a little bit, or silently committed, or whatever it was, unofficially. USC's portal quarterback, whatever it was, and the Miller Moss does his thing, and obviously USC's like, well, no, hold on a minute, we'll use those funds for something else, and yeah, I do think that's very interesting. They obviously bring in Julian Sayin, Aaron Nolan, two highly touted freshmen there, so yeah, I feel like Ohio State we were pretty close on. We kind of saw a lot of that coming. If you told me they were going to be 11-1, I'd be like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it obviously would have mattered who they lost to depend on what happened with the college football playoffs and everything else that happened in other conferences. I think this was a weird year where we saw 2 years ago, right, where Ohio State and Michigan made it, after playing each other because of everything else that happened in the other conferences, namely the Big 12 and the ACC, and also obviously the Pac-12. So yeah, I think it's all good stuff here for Ohio State. I mean, they had a good year, not great year, but obviously that's what comes with the Ohio State job is it's that much pressure is put on you that 11-1 is not good enough.
Yeah, which is crazy. So I think we both didn't take the over there, but pretty solid analysis though. I think like we were kind of right about Ohio State this year in a lot of ways. I think we were higher on Kyle McCord than I think he ultimately ended up being, but still, pretty good analysis there. Other coaches that did not get fired that maybe saved themselves from the hot seat or are still on the hot seat or didn't really move anywhere from the hot seat. Got some names in mind? Or
Yeah, we'll go right to bat. We'll go Rutgers and Greg Schiano, right? I was a guy that took their over. I bought I bought a game and I moved it down to over 3.5 at minus 188.
which
I
is
I
pretty criminal,
I
but
didn't need it. I didn't need it in the long run. They won 6 games in the regular season there, and obviously I just was taking the free money with that, so that was kind of crazy. But in terms of what we were looking for was Kirk Straka coming over. That's what scared you away from that is you watched the spring game and obviously you saw him on third and long check it down multiple times and run like little hitch routes. Yep.
can I just say though, I also nailed the Gavin Wimstat or Wimstat stinks at quarterback take. I think I nailed that as well, right? And I nailed the Kurt Schrock stinks as well. They ran the ball down bad Big Ten teams' throats. Is that not what happened? And they played great defense.
Yeah.
Aaron Lewis is a good player. They got a good defensive coordinator as well, Razmiak, right?
Yep.
Did he get an extension there or did he get a
Yep.
job? But yeah, he got an
Min- Min-
extension there.
Minnesota came knocking for him and he got a nice little extension. Good for him.
Yeah, good for him. And so I look, this is a great season for Rutgers. Great season. So I think so you think he's officially out of the dumps right now? Out of the hot seat? Or do you think he still
Now,
needs to kind of continue this success?
well, obviously in the Big Ten and the new Big Ten, it's going to be very cutthroat. I have no doubt about saying that. But I also think that this is important. A nice little step for him. I believe this is what year 4. Shiano's been there for 4 years. Wow, that's crazy. And he has not made a bowl game yet. Technically in 2021 he made one, but that was because the APR record and also with everything going on, not a ton of eligible teams, and they lost the Gator Bowl back in 2021. But yeah, so he hasn't been to a bowl game. Rutgers himself hasn't been a bowl game since Kyle Flood, all the way back in 2014. So that it was really nice to see 9 years later getting a bowl game, beating a team like Miami pretty soundly. So yeah, I think this did wonders for Rutgers and Greg Schiano moving forward. And obviously, I'm gonna keep saying it, but in the new Big Ten, like things gonna change, and I hate to keep saying it, but I want to emphasize it because and remind people that hey, like this is gonna be a totally different year of college football. Expectations, reality, all that good stuff is gonna kind of totally shifted and shaped in the next 6 7 months until we have college football again. So yeah, I think this is pretty darn good and good analysis by me. Credit to me. I'm just kidding. I kind of won for the wrong reasons. I was hoping Kirk Soraka would take a step forward there. I've and I was also hoping that Gavin Winsap would take a step forward and get healthy. And obviously, neither of those things happened. They still ran the ball super well, played good defense. And to be honest, like in the Big Ten, if the schedule falls right, like that's all you need to do to make a bowl game. And we've seen Minnesota and Iowa and Illinois and teams like that feast on that for years now. And obviously things are going to change. I like I'll say that again. Things are going to
Yeah.
change, but or maybe they won't. Maybe the new Pac-12 newcomers will have to, bend and shift to the Big Ten way, the Big Ten West, as we like to refer to it.
I don't know, man. I don't know. I Great season. I think we kind of nailed it on the predict. I mean, I didn't take the over, but I saw the good defense that was there potentially, a really good defense it ended up being, and I guess Gavin Wimsatt kind of stinking. But look, how do you feel about Ethan Kaliak Manis going in there next year?
Gavin Wimsatt 2.0. I mean, at
Not
least Kurt
even.
Ciarrocca's his
How
guy.
about not even?
Okay, let's be real about Ethan, his mechanics, he was super inconsistent, and yeah, he was bad. I'm kind of done defending him, but also like there's some upside there. You've seen it in certain games. So we'll see if Soraka, who recruited him out of high school, can see if he can maximize his talents at least a little bit, right? I don't know. I like it for Ethan. I don't know if I love it for Rutgers, but also like how attractive is that quarterback position there, anyways? Who do you have at receiver, right? You lost a lot of guys the year before, and you didn't really replace them with a ton of guys. You brought in some transfers, guys that have never really played at the FBS level, and they didn't really hit like you wanted them to. And so we'll see where they go from here. But yeah, I don't know how much different I feel about Rutgers, but I do think maybe eventually they're going to just keep getting better and better. And I think hovering around 6, 7 wins would be super successful for Greg Schiano and Rutgers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you have another coach in mind that you want to talk about that maybe played themselves out of the hot seat or didn't, or is right still in the same spot?
I don't know. I do think one guy I will bring up just because we do get it a lot and it is kind of a big deal in college football is the whole James Franklin debate. Like, is Penn State tired of James Franklin? And I'll tell you this, the administration wise and the guys that cash the checks and that get the money there, they love him. He brings in a lot of revenue for them. He wins a lot of football games. Now, can he beat Ohio State and Michigan consistently? He has not. Doesn't mean he can't eventually. I do think that with Michigan leaving and a lot of stuff happening and shifting in the Big Ten, I do think Penn State's right there next to everybody else. And with the talent and resources that they do have to be able to compete. And I think that's the frustrating part for Penn State fans is that they believe that they're right there and they believe they're a tier 1 team in the Big Ten, but yet they continue to fall short of expectations. So I guess not really expectations. Did they hit their over? Which, by the way, we both cashed, and that was a mega play for both of us. Felt really good about it. Um,
Super
and
play.
and
When we're
obviously we
both
were
on something, it's a super play.
yeah, and I mine was a I believe I said mega play lock. So it was just like I felt really good about it. They won 10 games. They beat every team they were supposed to beat, and then they lost to the teams they weren't supposed to beat. And that's just about the most James Franklin season you can have. Is that enough to get him off the hot seat? Or if you're a Penn State fan, right, are you frustrated with him? Do you think they are? Do you think they should be?
Yeah, I mean, no, they shouldn't. I don't know. I think as a fan, it's okay to be frustrated, like to want more. Like you should, as a fan, always like you should want more, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the expectation should be like as a fan, yeah, it's I can understand being upset and not being able to beat Ohio State, not being able to beat Michigan. When you're recruiting at a similar level as Michigan, it's not better. And I mean, right? I mean, I don't know. You're our recruiting guy, but you're definitely not recruiting at the same level as Ohio State, right?
No.
But I don't know. You've had all these hopes. You've brought in the 5-star quarterbacks before, and they still just can't win those ball games. Just I don't know. I will say though, our analysis before the season, right? We both said that the offensive line was going to be really good, and there were pieces of it that were good, right? Not as a unit, I think it underwhelmed greatly, and so did that running back room, specifically Nick Singleton. Katron Allen, I thought was better than Nick Singleton this year. I don't know
Yeah.
what your thoughts on that are, but Katron Allen was better. All right. We talked about before the season loving the defense. Boy, did that age like just fine wine. We said it could be one of the best defenses in the country, and it was, if not the best, behind Michigan. I believe specifically, if I'm looking at these notes right here, I said that the secondary was very good, but I was worried about the size against Ohio State, which I do remember talking about. That ended up aging like fine wine as well. So I don't know, some pretty decent takes. I mean, I was a lot of people were high on Drew Aller. I was high on him for sure, but I had my questions about him, and I think some of those were answered. But now you got an offensive coordinator that can work with just about anyone. You got an offensive coordinator that won Cole ball games with freaking Cole Ballard walk on for true freshman quarterback Cole Ballard. Actually, I don't know if they won that game. They played Tech. They might have lost that game. But anyways, still getting stuff done. That's the point. That's what Andy K does. You get stuff done. So I like the spot that Penn State's in. I think you should keep James Franklin. He's got a great coaching staff in there going right now. He's producing NFL talent. I don't know. The wins might come eventually, and with the 12-team playoff, like you're gonna have your chance as Penn State. You're gonna have your chance to get in and compete for the college football playoffs, even if you're not winning the Big Ten championship. So I say hold off. Let James Franklin cook. All right, let him cook. Let him cook.
Yeah, I do think this was obviously a little bit disappointing year because I think you just expected a little bit more out of Drew Loar. He was a guy that was a top five, top three guy nationally, not only at his position, but nationally, coming out of high school from Medina, Ohio. And obviously that 2022 class that they brought in, who was sophomores this year, will be juniors this upcoming season in 2024, right? That was ranked sixth nationally. You mentioned that they're not quite recruiting at Ohio State's level. Maybe that's not quite up to top three like Ohio State has been. Six is damn good. And this has been a class they've been building up to the last couple of years. They feel really good about it. You've seen them kind of go and make some moves in the portal, which we do like. Bringing in a guy like AJ Harris, who we talked about, Jalen Kimber, another DB from the SEC, a couple linemen from Wisconsin, obviously Julian Fleming, the former five-star from Ohio State, and they believe that they can make some moves here, tweak it there, here and there, and really compete in the Big Ten. Yeah, I felt our analysis was pretty good. I was a little bit higher on Drew Lar and obviously Dante Cephas, which did not hit at all. And even the O line and running backs. I mean, yeah, Kay Allen was pretty good at times. Nick Singleton, was not as productive as he was as a freshman, and that O line was supposed to be just dominant. And in big time games, they didn't really get it done. Wasn't on the offensive coordinator, was on the scheme, was on Drew Lar, setting protection, not getting the ball out right away. Who knows? It could be a lot of different things. Regardless, though, we kind of it was a pretty good read on our end, and they kind of turned out how it was. I don't think you should be worried about James Franklin long term. I think he can win there and win big. Just because he hasn't doesn't mean he won't. But yeah, I think we kind of hit the head on the nail or the nail on the head there with Penn State.
Absolutely. What about what about Mike Locksley? Was he really on the hot seat, or
No,
was it like I? No, he wasn't on the hot seat. Was his seat really warm? Like
no, I
legitimately?
I don't think so. I do think back to back 8-win years. And obviously 7 wins the year prior. It
That's a
started off
lot in the Big Ten, by the way.
for Maryland. Okay, let's not
That is a
let's not.
lot.
Yeah, yeah. I do think that's pretty darn good for Mike Locksley there. Obviously, they lost a ton of talent right on both sides of the ball, wide receiver room, defensive backs, all that good stuff. He's developed pretty darn well. So credit to them, credit to them getting it done. So yeah, they obviously they started off super hot and they kind of struggled, limped to the finish line. We saw that happen though. That happens quite almost every year for Maryland, or at least the past couple years. So no surprise there. When you get into the real meats and potatoes of that schedule, right in the Big Ten, you're going to take some losses. The durability isn't quite there yet in this program. I think another year of recruiting okay is going to do it. Hopefully, fill some needs in the portal. Haven't done a ton other than MJ Morris, quarterback that they got from North Carolina State. Um, so we'll see about all of that. But yeah, I think, he got his wins. They won the bowl game. They beat Auburn. They spanked Auburn this year.
But
Gonna keep the
Billy
fans and
friggin'
donors.
Edwards, who still stinks, by the way. I'll stand by that take I had earlier this
Yeah.
season.
So they get it done. They keep the fans and boosters happy. I'm sure. And they almost had a chance to land a 5-star guy until Colorado came in at the last second there with Jordan Seaton. But that was almost wild. Wild 24 hours, 30 hours for Maryland there, as they were the favorites for a top 10 player nationally. So, but yeah, I think Maryland should be happy. Should be pretty happy.
Yeah, do not question if Mike Locksley is a good coach or not, right? You could question his hiring of Kevin Sumlin and Josh Gaddis, which I believe I mentioned preseason as well, potentially being a problem, which is why I leaned under big time. And the under did cash. I don't regret not taking the under, by the way. I mean, this is a team that could have went over easily. They started 6-0, like you said.
Yeah.
They were moving. Just things happen sometimes, and things derail a little bit. So especially as they got into conference play there, started playing against some really, really talented teams. They uh they played Michigan closer, right? Than I believe just about anyone,
They
right?
played Michigan and Ohio State close, right? Remember at the halftime of that game, they had a real chance to win against Ohio State. Ohio State came up and just blew the doors off them in that second half. And yeah, like you mentioned, it was I believe it was 31-24, Michigan and Maryland. And obviously it was at Michigan, if I'm not no, it was at Maryland. I'm sorry. It's at Maryland. But yeah, regardless though, it was pretty damn close game. And I think that's pretty impressive for Mike Locksley to do that against the class of the Big Ten, the two teams everybody kind of looks up to.
Yeah, I think it's ridiculous. Ridiculous to think that Michael Oxley is even near the hot seat. He shouldn't be. If he is, then I don't know what that administration is doing,
Well, I
quite
think
frankly.
a lot was made from after starting, 5-0, whatever it was, and then losing to Ohio State. And then you went on a little bit of a skid, but okay, you played Ohio State. You finished that 4 game skid with Penn State. Okay, those are not games you're supposed to win, anyways, at Maryland. And then you had a close loss at home to Illinois, which was tough, right? Obviously, Illinois was not as good as we thought they were going to be this year. But losing to Northwestern at the time looked awful. And everyone's like, what are you guys doing? What's happening with Maryland? They're on a 3 game skid, blah, blah. Then they get blown out by Penn State the week after. And it was all doom and gloom. And they finished the season super strong in November, right? They beat Nebraska on the road there. As ugly as it was, they beat them. They played Michigan close. They beat the Rutgers, their quote unquote rival in the Big Ten. And then obviously they stomped Auburn in a good SEC program. So, yeah, I don't think that Northwestern loss looks as bad as it does, back in end of October, like we thought it was. It's a bowl eligible team that you lost to, and a team that beat a pretty good team in the Pac-12.
Yeah, I agree. Let's rip off the Band-Aid. Minnesota, the Gophers. On this show, neither of us took them at seven, over seven, but I definitely slammed them at 6.5, and it still did not cash by 2 games. And there were so many opportunities for them to win ball games. I mean, and there are some cows out there that think that PJ Fleck is a bum, and I'll let you defend him for a second.
Yeah, I just think people don't understand him. They think he's fake. They think he's a snake oil salesman. Whatever you want to do, who cares? He doesn't care what you think, which is credit to him. Us as Minnesota fans, I think we're frustrated at times. I know after that Northwestern game, I was livid. I was super upset. It was a brutal month of October or September and October until you beat Iowa. And let's be honest here, like if you beat Iowa or Wisconsin, Minnesota fans will forgive you. And no matter what happens,
Immediately.
you beat Iowa or Wisconsin, and then you win your bowl game, which he did, right? Going 5-7, making it because of good academics.
Is he still undefeated at Minnesota bowl games?
Yes, he is. And again, that's what matters at programs like this. You cannot think that it's Ohio State. You cannot think it's even Auburn, right? Schools like that in that high expectations, maybe almost too lofty expectations. Minnesota fans are pretty reasonable and happy with what we take. So yeah, it was a tough year. And I think part of the reasons that happened is depth and the and defense was very, very lacking. Their linebacker core got decimated, and Purdue just embarrassed them, and even Wisconsin too to some extent. Um, and Illinois as well. But what's new? What's new with Joe Rossi? We had Mariano Marin the year before, and that was terrible. Joe Rossi moves on to Michigan State. Good for him. Gets a promotion there. He was a highly respected college football head coach or defensive coordinator, defensive mind. A guy that's really kind of made up for that talent gap at Minnesota and some of that depth there. It didn't quite happen this year. Their defense got exposed, not his fault. They had to replace some guys, which you mentioned, right? John Michael Schmitz, their center, Terrell Smith, their cornerback, and Mo Ibrahim, and obviously Tanner Morgan as well. So those guys, the running back position battled injuries, the cornerback position battled injuries, and secondary did, and then obviously the O line was good, not great. Um, yeah, it was tough. And I was very excited for this year. I know a lot of fans were. We were happy about Ethan Caligman coming in. We thought he'd be the savior. We saw what he did against Wisconsin, and we let that fool us into thinking he was is this really good quarterback in the Big Ten. Can he change our minds at Rutgers? Maybe, like I talked about earlier, but I don't quite see it. I think they're moving on. Max Brosmer's coming in, a couple of transfers. On the defense side of the ball, should be a much different looking team next year. Daniel Jackson, bright side, he turned into a stud. He's a legit wide receiver one in the Big Ten. A guy that was just about 1,000 yards. He is a weapon, even though everyone knows he's getting the ball. Right, no one else stepped up. Brevin Spanford, we missed on. We thought he'd be really good. He took a step back. Corey Crooms, credit to you for not being on as high on him as everybody else was. Elijah Spencer needed a year to develop and to adjust to Big Ten football. And obviously, Darius Taylor hit, but he was hurt. He played 5 games and he rushed for like 1,000 yards. So that was
Crazy,
pretty
by the
awesome.
way. That's crazy.
It's nuts. You
Just
saw
for
the
a
bowl
thousand
game.
yards, he played in 5 games.
Yeah, it was literally wild. He had multiple 200-yard games, which is just only Minnesota football, right? And you still lose a bunch. But yeah, you beat Iowa, and that's that. You're bringing in a massive recruiting class. Coy Parrish, Twitter, videos going around on Twitter right now of him just getting his crazy alley oop. I mean, the guy's a freak. You saw him win the All American Bowl, getting some good publicity from Minnesota on the recruiting trail. Exciting to see there. You're bringing a guy like Drake Lindsay, a couple other guys we love on the offensive and defensive lines, Nathan Roy, Brett Carroll, and obviously Riley Sunram, all guys that were All Americans or on the All American Bowl participants in high school. Yeah, it was tough. I mean, what do you got to say about Minnesota? Like as a non-biased, SEC guy.
I was disappointed for sure. They just found ways to lose games. They got conservative, and Texas A&M was a culprit of that as well. Some other teams were culprits of that. Like there were just times when, you know, I get that field position is a big thing in the Big Ten West, right? And against certain teams, it's okay to run the ball on 3rd and 12, right? But like it, not that it was Kirk Chirac all over again, but it just like felt like the offense didn't take the steps that it needed to take at all. So disappointing for sure. But let's talk about another team that disappointed me. Let's talk about Illinois. Where the heck was John Paddock week 1?
Oh, he's just awesome, isn't he? We
I
love
mean,
John
and
Paddock.
he's out of eligibility. We never get to see him play football in a college football uniform ever again. How ridiculous is that? He was unbelievable. I'll I'll take the blame. I was way too high on Illinois. I took their over 6.5. All right. That did not hit by any stretch of the imagination. It was pretty close. Right? It's pretty close. But it's also close to getting worse. Like they shouldn't have won that Minnesota game as well.
But it was John
But
Paddock. It was John Paddock that came in there and he
yeah, it's
went
John.
3 for 3, 85 yards and a touchdown in about 45 seconds to win the
Yeah.
game.
So what was I high on for Illinois? Their D line, right? And it was still really good most of the time. And Johnny Jazur Newton, Jazon Newton was unbelievable. We'll get to talking. We'll talk about him later on when we talk about awards and stuff. But he was unbelievable. But it can't just be him, right? And Keith Richards was okay. Gabe Hawkins was pretty good as well. They're all really good in pass rush for sure. But like their linebackers were not good. So their secondary turned out to be really hard to replace. Aaron Henry, of course, replacing Ryan Walters at defensive coordinator, which I didn't hate that at all, right? Promote internally, let those guys stay in that scheme, but they didn't have the press man bodies that they did last year to really run the defense that Aaron Henry wants. They didn't have it this year. And I was worried about that. And I mentioned that, being worried about that. But I also thought that Luke Altmaier would be pretty good. And he was pretty bad. So definitely a big time miss on there. I was right about being worried about the run game, having huge question marks without Chase Brown, losing some guys on the offensive line there. Definitely going to be interesting moving forward. I believe in that program. I mean, they're playing some pretty decent football these days. So Brett Bielema will be fine there. So what you did not take the over. You feel like your assessment of Illinois preseason was pretty accurate, or what were some things that you missed?
Yeah, I questioned the offense a little bit. I did like the Luke Altmaier coming in. I didn't think he was maybe necessarily the problem, but he was not the answer. Obviously, we saw John Paddock do his thing in November. Was just wild to see. In a shootout against Indiana, which we'll get to later on. Yeah, it was a frustrating year because again, this is another year where, first of all, the year prior you should have won the West and you didn't. And then obviously this year where Iowa was just Iowa, right? And Wisconsin was down. Northwestern was better than you thought, even though and whatnot. And obviously Minnesota was down. Nebraska still not great yet. Purdue was down after a coaching change. So like it was to be the Big Ten West was to be had, and nobody else took it. We were looking for obviously you were looking for Illinois to do that, and build on last year's success. But in the end, yeah, you mentioned they lost a ton of talent to the NFL, and they couldn't quite replace it. And that's kind of the reality of most programs in college football. Like you lose major first round guys, major talented players that play a lot and successfully in the NFL in year one. And you feel that. You really feel that. You lose a defensive coordinator to going over to Purdue in the conference in your division. And by the way, Purdue spanked you in September there. Um, so yeah, it's or yeah, it's the end of September there. So it was tough. I was can't say I was super surprised in terms of I didn't know if they were gonna be like lead college football playoff contenders, but I also thought they would be better than 5-7, and that's what they ended up as.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on. Yeah, let's I guess pick this thing up. I guess Purdue, their over under was 5.5. I leaned hard under and you leaned over. So we faded each other a little bit on this. Here's what I said. I was not super high on Hudson Card, and I was not super high on Graham Harrell, by the way. Like up until that point, I don't know that he's had real success as a coordinator anywhere. I don't believe that he really, really has. At USC he was not particularly amazing. This year, honestly, he was better. I thought the actual strength of Purdue's team offensively was their pass game. They had some way better receivers than I thought they were going to have. I thought that was going to be a problem. It was not. It was a strength of that team. And I also thought that their defensive line was not going to be looking really great. They had a couple pieces, but wasn't particularly great. They needed some cornerbacks, which was right. They needed them bad. And I believe I also mentioned that the Big Ten West itself was getting better with Purdue getting worse. I don't know that take held up. I think it just looked like the Big Ten West, and Purdue was just at the bottom of it, you know? So and of course, mentioned what they lost, a lot of what made them so good last year, aka Aiden O'Connell, Charlie Jones, um, oh gosh, the tight end stud, uh,
Peyton Durham.
Hayden Durham. Thanks for the save. So, what about you? Did you took the over? So clearly they must not have met your expectations.
Well, I was just leaning the over. To be
Oh,
honest,
sorry, you didn't take the over. You leaned over. That's what I meant to say. Sorry.
yeah, but back in the early summer, we talked about first year coaches we thought would struggle, and I just threw out Ryan Walters because I was just in a vacuum. I was like, you know what, boom.
Early,
And
yeah.
I did, and then once by the time it got to late August there, and I really deep dived into Purdue, I just thought that line was so high or so low. I'm sorry, and I just thought maybe they'd probably make a bowl game more times than not. I was high on Nick Scorton.
Especially with the schedule.
Yeah, exactly. And I was thinking like, yes, you have Virginia Tech, you have Syracuse, which are tough schedules for sure, but
But were
tough,
they back
but,
back
but
in back in September?
exactly.
The Virginia Tech was not to us,
And Syracuse
and
is not really either.
Syracuse
And
maybe.
those were winnable games that I expected them to compete in. And obviously they went 1-1, which is okay, but they just struggled in Big Ten West play. You kind of got blown out by Nebraska. You beat Minnesota and Illinois, but that was really it. Everywhere else you struggled. Northwestern got the best of you. Wisconsin obviously got the best of you. Iowa, you had a chance to win that game. You probably should have. And
Indiana
obviously,
almost beat you.
yeah, you beat Indiana. So I just thought I was thinking a little bit more from them. In hindsight, I probably regret it. For sure. And the problem is like it doesn't get much easier, right? I'm looking at the 2024 schedule and it is brutal. It is your out of conference is Notre Dame, right? And Oregon State, right? I mean, yes, we'll see what Oregon State looks like, but that's not easy, right? And then obviously in conference, you still have Wisconsin, you still have Illinois, you have Oregon added to your schedule, you have Ohio State, you have Penn State, and then we'll see how Michigan State and Indiana look as first year coaches there. Like that is it's gonna be brutal for Ryan Walters out there. They're doing some nice things in the portal, but with Purdue, I this was a missed opportunity, I guess, if you want to call it. It was tough with Jeff Brom leaving and having to replace so much of that roster and that team. So I guess it's kind of not their fault. But at the same time, it's not going to get easier, and you lose a lot of talent in the portal. Nick Scorton down to the SEC, Deion Burks down to Oklahoma. You got some guys going elsewhere as well. It's tough, but we'll see if Hudson Card and Ryan Walters can rebound and then obviously, kind of regain some of that Jeff Brom magic.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Wisconsin now. They finished the season 7-6. They're 7-5, lost their bowl game to LSU, who was just a much better team than they were. It's a tough matchup. Here's some things that we said. We both leaned under, I believe.
Yep.
Do you regret not taking the under?
I do a little bit. I think in hindsight, 8.5 was a little bit too high and a little bit too juicy for first year Luke Fickell. Credit to us. I mean, yes, they did disappoint. They did hit their under. So I guess you could say they did, but in our opinion, I don't think it was quite far off from what we actually thought it was going to be. And they battled injuries at the running back and quarterback position. So you can't really fault them for that as much either. But yeah, with everything that went on, I kind of expected their defense to take a step back, right? I did think it would take a year or two to overhaul that roster, right? I talked about Paul Chris maybe not leaving it in as good of a spot as maybe everyone assumed it was. It's Wisconsin, the Big Ten West are going to have more talent than everybody else. Not necessarily the case this year. I did think changing a scheme is easier said than done. Ask um, our net down at Mississippi State how that went to change from an air raid to physical run and ground and pound and defense kind of team. This was going the opposite, ground and pound, physical and play defense kind of team over to that Phil Longo, Luke Fickell air raid, passing around a little bit more. It was tough,
I guess
and
it's not like
obviously,
an air raid, but it is pass heavy,
yes,
especially like
thank you.
that was something that we keyed in on the preseason. It's like, how is that going to work in November when it is an absolute, when it's 28 degrees outside, can't feel your fingers. Like it's a different ball game. And there's a reason that the Big Ten West plays the style of football that they do. And it's kind of an anomaly that Ohio State plays the way that they play because, I mean, Ohio State can do both. They can get physical on the ground, right? And then they can obviously, they have explosive athletes in the air as well. But that's just the brand of football that you play in the Big Ten West. So it was, you're right. That style change definitely was something that we were both concerned about moving forward into this past season.
Yeah, and with that, like your schedule wise, in terms of games you should have won, maybe you should have lost, right? Indiana beat you, and yes, that was with a backup quarterback that didn't play well, but that was still tough. Northwestern absolutely outplayed you and kind of embarrassed you, and then obviously Nebraska, you beat in overtime, which was a pretty good win for you guys at Wisconsin, and obviously you beat your rival Minnesota pretty handily in Minnesota. But I was a totally battered and just shell of a team in Minnesota. So yeah, and you lost to Iowa against a terrible quarterback in Deacon Hill. That game I know frustrated a lot of Wisconsin folks.
Revenge game for Deacon Hill, though.
By the way, yep, exactly, exactly. And obviously Washington State kind of took it to you in September, but that was back when they were playing fantastic lights out football. Can't really blame you for that, for going all the way to the West Coast, and Cam Ward just puts on a show and beats you with some wide receivers there, Josh Kelly and others. Yeah, I thought it was okay. I think the future is brighter than the season was. I think they can actually compete in the new look Big Ten, unfortunately. But yeah, that's where I stand.
We haven't talked about Iowa yet. Well, I played the over. The over is at 8.5 plus money plus 110. I played it. I actually took it earlier in the summer when it was at 7.5. So, little pat on the back there. Yeah, this is a team that 10 games they won in the regular season. That's unbelievable. So, what was I so high on in Iowa? Their defense, of course. And if you were to, like, if you're saying that right now, you're like, well, duh, yeah. But like back in the summer, if you remember, Jack Campbell gone, Riley Moss gone, Lucas Van Ness gone. Those are three really good players. Two of them first rounders. Riley Moss was a third rounder, fourth rounder, went to the Broncos. That's a really good squad right there. And you're losing that core of your team, and you're like, oh, how good is this defense going to be? Can they carry this team Well, I kind of anticipated the offense getting a little bit better, and it did not. So I anticipated the offense getting a little bit better, and the defense still playing at a high level. Maybe not as high as I thought. That maybe I didn't think they were going to play as high as they did last year, but certainly they did, and they met up those expectations. So talked about Deontay Craig. He's a good ball player. So matching up against Wisconsin very well. That ended up being a good take as well. Said that they didn't need to get beat Penn State to reach 9 wins. That was clear. And yeah, it was just good. Valley was good in the crossover games because you played Penn State and then you played Rutgers, right? And Rutgers ended up being better than we thought they were going to be. Well, I guess better than I thought they were going to be. You were high on Rutgers, but they ended up taking it to Rutgers. So you were high on Iowa too, but there was a no play. So did you kind of have that uh same view? Were you looking through the same lens as me, but I just kind of took the over, or what were you thinking
Yeah,
preseason?
I got scared off by just all the changes offensively. Now, it ended up not mattering, like you mentioned, their offense was still terrible, but a lot of that was due to injuries, right? Cade McNamara, the tight ends, the running backs, everyone got hurt there. So a lot of it changed, and they kind of just threw Deacon Hill in there, and Caleb Johnson, broke off a score here or there. Cooper DeJean had a nice punt return or whatever it was to set up scores for that Iowa team. They kind of did, and they played very complimentary football, at least on one side of the ball. And we also mentioned Brian Ferentz just being terrible, and that was about right. But everyone knew that. So I don't know. I just think it was scared because of all the changes with Caden McNamara. There was so much excitement. I was wondering if it was a little bit too much and too rich for me. Ended up not being so. They won 10 games in the regular season, even after losing to a pretty bad Minnesota football team in a very controversial fashion. So yeah, I think I don't know if I would have said 10-2, 11-1 ish area, but they played pretty darn good, and that's kind of why I held on. I thought they were the Big Ten West favorites, right? You mentioned how they match up with Wisconsin. I love that take, and everyone else in the Big Ten West. I didn't think was quite enough ready to compete with Iowa. So yeah, it kind of is what it is. I'm a little bit upset I didn't take the over for sure, but I'm not mad about it because I was a little bit skeptical on the offense, and that turned out to be true.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about Nebraska. This will be our last thing that we talk about, and then we'll get into other stuff as well. Nebraska. I think we both had big question marks, right? I think we knew that we were going to see some kind of improvement because Matt Rule, and we thought the staff that he brought in was pretty effective. And preseason, I believe, I specifically talked on there were a lot of freshmen that were going to play for this team. And that's not a formula to win in the Big Ten, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, right? Like if you're looking at this class of freshmen that played this past year, if you get some of those guys to stay in that program and win some ball games down the road, I think they can do just that. I think they can win some ball games down the road. I like that a lot. So I leaned under in this one, I believe, but because I said making a bowl game in Matt Rule's first year would be insanely impressive, and he almost did it. He
Hmm.
almost did it. Probably should have beaten Minnesota, for being honest,
Yeah.
and probably should have beaten Iowa, if we're being honest. But who shouldn't have beaten Iowa? This could have been a lot better record than it showed at 5-7. So, I questioned Jeff Sims. I saw you wrote that down. So if you didn't know, CD went back and watched his videos, and he took notes on like everything that we said. And I was looking at his notes, and he said that I questioned Jeff Sims, which sounds about right. I should have definitely questioned Jeff Sims bringing him in, but yeah. What about you? What were your expectations? I believe you leaned under as well, the under 6 wins.
Yeah, I wanted to see some improvement. Like you mentioned, they were going to play a ton of freshmen. It was going to be a total overhaul, culture, staff, style of play, all that good stuff was going to change from Scott Frost to Matt Rule, which it needed to for sure. I think everyone would agree with that. I think Nebraska fans knew there would be growing pains. I do think you kind of were a little bit frustrated in the end result, in just in terms of how it started, right? With probably should have beaten Minnesota, right, on that Thursday night, primetime game there. and then also how it ended. You had a chance. The Big Ten West was in your fingers. You had a chance to go down and play some competitive, serious football games in November, and you lost four straight one possession football games. Brutal, 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 brutal. One of them was overtime. One of them was Iowa, which should not have happened at all, and obviously Maryland, Michigan State to round that off. So, but also it was kind of impressive because you did it in a year where your starting quarterback for most of it completed under 50% of passes. And I guess I should have been more questionable about Jeff Sims. I think I was just excited about him. I didn't think it would be this bad. I think a lot of it that was, a little bit mental, unfortunately, because you don't see a guy who had some success in the ACC just look so, so bad, dropping the ball, turning the ball over just left and right, like it was with Jeff Sims there in September. I didn't want to buy in too early. I wanted they were a team to watch for me, yes, but not quite Big Ten West contenders, and that turned out to be kind of accurate. So yeah, I definitely did lean the under.
All right. All right. Let's talk about Michigan. We already talked a bunch about them. I'll be brief. I didn't take their over, but that was mostly because I already took their national championship ticket. I thought that this was the best team in the country entering into the season. I didn't take the over just because Ohio State and Penn State are really good, and I had plus 1025 national championship ticket waiting on them. And boy, did that cash. So that was pretty awesome. Feels good. Feels good. So we nailed everything. I mean, we said that they were going to run the ball well. We said that they were going to play great defense. We said that their offensive line was going to be absolute animals. Turns out their defense was better than we imagined. So that was awesome. What about you?
Yeah,
You took their over, right?
I pounded the over. Yeah, I loved it. I thought super highly of this roster. I said too much talent and depth to slip up against bad teams in the Big Ten. And obviously all you had to do is go 1-1 against Penn State and Ohio State, which they ended up going 2-0 pretty soundly against both those teams. Only really tested, like seriously tested against Bama, and obviously I guess you could call it against Ohio State as well. I thought they'd lean on their defense and their O line, which they did. I wanted to see a little bit more development of JJ, and I thought there would be. I guess I was a little bit wrong on that. You were right to question him. I think that's part of the reason why you kind of talked yourself out of the over. In addition to already having that futures ticket. I said my questions on this roster I thought were pretty spot on. I said their weaknesses were kicker, which I think we saw to be true at times in some big games, and then also it's our kicker trying to replace Jake Moody, who's obviously star, Michigan kicker for them. And then also I thought their wide receiver room was good, but wasn't high end elite to separate and make big plays in big games. And I thought that was pretty accurate as well. I love the new secondary, even after losing some guys to the NFL. And I even after losing Mozzie Smith up the middle, I liked Chris Jenkins a lot as well. So I don't think it really messed up either way. Yeah, I thought that was pretty sound analysis from our end. I didn't think they'd quite be this dominant. But at the same time, like I'm not surprised. That roster was loaded up and down. And they were by far the best team. Nah, not by far, but they were the best team in college football, and it showed. And I'm happy for them for winning it all. Now they're reaping, now they have to deal with the consequences of major success with their coach moving on and a lot of players moving on to NFL. And now their roster is going to be, open season for everybody else. So it's a good thing and bad thing for obviously all the reasons I just explained.
Yep, absolutely. Real quickly, most disappointing and then most overachieving team. Let's say, okay, most overachieving Northwestern. Okay, we'll get that out of the way.
Yeah. If I had to pick a team that was not named Northwestern, I guess Rutgers, right? I think that'd probably be, even though I thought
I
big things
agree.
of them this year, but I also think that to win 6, 7 games this year with that bowl game, pretty darn impressive, right? And maybe I guess you could throw Iowa on there as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say those are
Because
my three. Those are my three.
yeah,
Most over or most disappointing.
right off the bat, Illinois
Illinois.
probably one of them.
Illinois.
Yeah, Minnesota. I think both you and I were higher on them than we probably should have been. Would you throw Penn State in that category as a disappointing team?
No, no. You won 10 games.
I,
Relax. Cash are over. Nah. I
that's
would
what I'm
put
saying.
a lot of national heads had. Well, I mean, Wisconsin was voted to win the Big Ten West, I believe, preseason. So I would say winning 7 games. and not even coming close to winning the Big Ten West. That I think would be underachieving for sure. So in my list, it's they're all in the Big Ten West. It's Wisconsin, Illinois, Minnesota.
Yeah. Yep, that's true.
Absolutely.
Yep, yep.
Did you have a favorite Big Ten game to watch?
I'll let you go. I'll let you go first on this one.
Yeah, you will. Give me Illinois versus Indiana, the absolute border rivalry. That game was an absolute showdown between none other than John Paddock and Brennan Sorsby. Elite game. Isaiah Williams went for like God knows how many yards. That game was awesome. So that was probably my favorite Big Ten game to watch. Of course, all eyes were on the Ohio State Michigan game. Oh well, that was a really good game. But I liked Indiana, Illinois. Come on. What about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna call me biased, but I thought that Minnesota Iowa game was just super, super awesome for a lot of
Might
reasons. It had
might be a little
everything you love.
biased.
It had everything you love in a Big Ten West game, right? You had low scoring, crazy wins, right? You had PJ Fleck calling timeouts in the first quarter to then run the ball on third down and kick a field goal before the quarter switched because the wind was so bad. And Minnesota wins without scoring a touchdown. They had the crazy Cooper DeJean, fair catch, not fair catch signal. And obviously that took off a game-winning, basically punt return for a touchdown. Deacon Hill was just about as bad as you could be. And yeah, and obviously the storyline with Minnesota and PJ Fleck finally beating Iowa. They played for one of the best trophies in college football, the Floyd of Rosedale. That's finally back in Minneapolis, which is obviously exciting for that city and that fan base as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's move on to awards. So we had like our conference winners, conference dark horses, right? Big Ten Player of the Year, Offensive Player of the Year, Defense Player of the Year, Newcomer of the Year, Coach of the Year. Steve and I both had JJ McCarthy for Big Ten Player of the Year. Now the Big Ten doesn't actually nominate anyone for that. So, but I will say, not that JJ McCarthy should have won it, but don't you think voters would have voted the quarterback of the best team in the Big Ten? I think that's pretty close. Not where my vote would have gone to. Not where my vote would have gone to. I think my Big Ten Player of the Year would have. It's hard to say because like it might have been Johnny Newton, man. It just might have been Johnny Newton. He was so good. He was so friggin' good, man. So good. Um, but yeah, and then offensive player of the year, we both said Marvin Harrison Jr. and he ended up winning that award. So that was awesome. Sash for us, good prediction, even though that was like the most chalk prediction of all time. Defensive player of the year, we also both said Johnny Newton. He ended up winning the award postseason. How about that? Just like that, I mean, basically 3 for 3. Big Ten newcomer of the year. This is where we got off track a little bit. You selected Dante Cephas. He's transferring from Kent State. Penn State is where he ended up going to. Did not work out there. On the other hand, I had Luke Allmeyer. And you know what? Those first couple games, he looked like the best quarterback in the Big Ten
Big Ten West.
West. Maybe Big Ten. I don't know. Kyle
JJ
McCord didn't
looked
look
pretty
very
good.
impressive. You're right. JJ did look good. But in terms of newcomers, he
That you
looked
felt
like
good.
I felt good those first couple weeks, but then he just stunk, and John Paddock was just a legend. Big Ten Coach of the Year, you had Kirk Ferentz, and he probably would be in any other year that Northwestern didn't have their thing. I had Jim Harbaugh, who you know, this of course was before all this stuff came out about, Connor Stallions. So let's give me a little bit of credit here. Like they won the national championship, they won the Big Ten. We both selected Michigan to win the conference, and both of our dark horses were Iowa. So we basically called the Big Ten championship game. I mean, I think we kind of nailed our Big Ten analysis this year, and I'm glad to have watched Big Ten football this year because we'll be seeing a different Big Ten next year.
Yeah. I mean, we did pretty darn good as good of as you could on those awards. I mean, it's hard to predict them. Obviously, we went chalk with a couple of them, and it hit. The newcomer of the year, I do regret taking Cephas. I'm sure you regret taking Altmaier. Dylan Thieneman, the Purdue true freshman safety, ended up winning that, deservingly so. He was a guy I was super high on in recruiting. Back in his senior year, his tape was incredible, and he's had success. His brothers have played at Purdue as well. But yeah, I mean, I went 3-0 in my over under win totals, and you went 3-2. I mean, that's both in the green there, and we hit the winner, and we hit the dark horse basically. So yeah, it's
And a national championship ticket.
a pretty good day all around at the office for us in a year where you had a lot of things going on with some coaching changes in the Big Ten West. You had, Michigan and Ohio State battling.
Mid-season. Well,
Yeah.
that was actually more the East. Mid-season was Michigan State, but yeah, some coaching changes early on. I thought we did awesome.
No, this was a fun conference to cover. It's obviously growing and changing, like we keep mentioning, and we're excited to continue to cover it. So if you're still watching, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button for us because we're obviously
Do
damn
it.
it, just do it, Carson.
Do it.
Stetson Bennett, I guess, is telling you to do it, so you got to do it, and obviously it's Emperor Palpatine. I can't do this with a straight face. I can't. I
It's
can't.
awesome. It's awesome. I'm sorry for you Spotify listeners that are not looking at the graphic right now. It's a beaut. It's my finest work. But
We'll
yeah.
post it on Twitter, I guess, if you want to see
Yeah, if you guys want to, I can't do this. All right. Make sure you guys, if you like the content, like the video, of course, and consider subscribing. We're almost at 160. Be that 160th subscriber. How about it? It's really easy. It doesn't cost you anything, but it helps us out immensely. Immensely. And you can follow us on X or Twitter, whatever, at the Redshirt Soft. Email us any mailbag questions or anything at all, business inquiries. Kidding, but not kidding. But kidding, not kidding.
Let's do it.
Redshirt Sophomore at gmail.com is where you can catch us there. Thank you guys so much. As always, CD, you got anything else for us on the way out?
No, like I said before, like and subscribe. Do it. Everything Matthew said. Enjoy the graphic. You have to like the video just because of that. Um,
Come on, do it. Just do it.
so
Do it.
we do it. So we love that. We hope you enjoyed our video. We worked hard on the preseason predictions and obviously all season long in our recap as well. So we hope you guys like our content. Let us know if we did anything wrong or if you saw stuff differently than we did in the Big Ten. We love hearing from you in the comments and all that good stuff. And yeah, stick around for more because just because the off season's here does not mean we're going anywhere. We got plenty of stuff to talk about, plenty of things to keep you guys busy until we get to football season again. We'll hold you guys over. Don't you worry.
Absolutely. And we will see you guys in the next one.